There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. They were the camouflage of a Tuesday night, or the quiet hum of a refrigerator, or the familiar weight of a friend leaning against you on a sofa. You don't recognize them as thresholds at first. They are simply minutes, unfolding as all the other minutes have. It is only in retrospect, when you trace the map of your own heart, that you find the pin marking the exact location where the landscape changed forever. For me, that moment smelled faintly of the lavender detergent I used and the rain that had slicked the city streets outside, and it felt like the almost imperceptible rhythm of another person's breathing against my collarbone. It was the moment I understood that some doors, once opened, could never truly be closed again, no matter how carefully you tried to swing them shut. He had said he didn't want to make it awkward. That had been his mantra, the verbal talisman he brandished whenever the space between us grew too quiet, too charged with a meaning he was not yet ready to name. He would say it with a nervous laugh, a quick deflection in his eyes, a subtle shifting of his body away from mine. It was a shield, for him and for me. It preserved the delicate architecture of our friendship, a structure I had come to treasure more than I dared admit, even to myself. And yet, here he was, asleep on my shoulder, his head tucked into the crook of my neck, his hand resting slack but possessive on my thigh. The television murmured on, casting shifting blue light across the room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, silent constellations. His words echoed in my mind. Don't want to make it awkward, a hollow promise against the profound, undeniable intimacy of his physical presence. This, I thought, as the warmth of him seeped through my shirt and into my very bones, was the definition of awkward. It was a beautiful, terrifying, heart-shattering awkwardness that I would have gladly lived inside for the rest of my life. His name was Sam, and to understand the impossible weight of him against me on that couch, you have to understand the lightness that had defined our friendship for the 5 years leading up to it. We had met in a crowded university gallery, a place I frequented and he had stumbled into by mistake, looking for a different building entirely. I was there to observe, to let the captured moments on the walls speak to me in the silent language of shadow and light that I understood better than spoken words. I was a photographer, then and now. My native tongue was composition, aperture, the decisive moment. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of kinetic energy and easy smiles, studying something practical and forward-facing like software engineering. He saw the world in lines of code, in elegant systems and logical progressions, while I saw it in fleeting expressions and the way late afternoon sun could turn a simple window into a piece of art. He had approached me, not with the smooth confidence he seemed to exude, but with a kind of genuine, disarming curiosity. He asked about the photograph I was staring at, a stark black and white image of an old man's hands, weathered and worn like ancient maps. I found myself explaining things I rarely spoke of, the power of a shallow depth of field, the way a high contrast can evoke emotion, the story held in the texture of skin. He listened. That was the first thing that struck me about Sam. For all his energy, for all the way he seemed to fill every room he entered, he knew how to be still and truly listen. He didn't just hear the words. He seemed to absorb the feeling behind them. By the end of our conversation, he had my number, and I had this strange, buoyant feeling in my chest, a lightness I hadn't realized was missing. Our friendship was built in the spaces between our two worlds. He would drag me out of my quiet apartment to loud, bustling parties thrown by his engineering cohort, where I would stand in a corner, camera in hand, feeling like an anthropologist studying a foreign tribe. He, in turn, would accompany me on my long, meandering walks through the city, waiting with impossible patience as I stopped to capture the way a shadow fell across a brick wall or the reflection of a passing cloud in a puddle. He learned to see the world a little more like I did, pointing out things he thought I might find beautiful, a peeling paint advertisement on an old building, the intricate pattern of a wrought iron gate. And I, in turn, learned to exist more comfortably in the noise of his world, anchoring myself to his steady presence in a crowded room. We were an unlikely pairing, the quiet observer and the unknowing initiator, the anchor and the sail. My feelings for him were a slow development, a photographic image emerging gradually in a darkroom tray. There was no single, blinding moment of realization. It was 1,000 tiny things. It was the way his laugh was a full-body event, starting in his chest and radiating outward. It was the fierce loyalty he showed his friends, a protective instinct that was both intimidating and incredibly endearing. It was the stray curl of dark hair that always fell across his forehead, a comma in the sentence of his face. It was the unexpected moments of vulnerability he would show, glimpses of a deep well of loneliness behind the bright, sociable facade. I kept these feelings locked away, stored in an unlit room in my heart, because the alternative was unthinkable. Sam was my best friend, and Sam, as far as I knew, dated women. There had been Chloe, a kind, intelligent art history major he'd dated for 2 years. I liked her genuinely. I had photographed them together once, for a project, and had seen the easy affection between them. I saw the way he looked at her, and I cataloged it, filed it away as evidence for the prosecution in the case against my own foolish heart. Loving him felt like a form of quiet self-destruction, a long, slow ache I had simply learned to live with. The friendship was the balm. The friendship was everything. It was the solid ground beneath my feet, and I would never, ever be the one to risk turning it into an earthquake. So I watched, and I listened, and I was his friend, and I told myself it was enough. For a long time it was. I built walls around that secret part of myself, soundproofing them so thoroughly that I could almost convince myself the silence was a choice. The first tremor that threatened the foundation of that carefully constructed piece came on a rainy Thursday in October. It was the kind of relentless, soul-dampening rain that makes the whole city feel like it's sighing. I was editing photos, lost in the digital dance of adjusting highlights and deepening shadows, when my phone buzzed with a text from him. "Can I come over?" It was unusual. We normally made plans, or he'd just show up, announcing his presence with a series of loud, rapid-fire knocks. The question felt tentative, fragile. I typed back a simple, "Of course." Doors unlocked, and felt a prickle of anxiety that I couldn't explain. 20 minutes later, the door creaked open and he was there, dripping on my entryway mat, his hair plastered to his forehead, his usual bright energy completely extinguished. He looked like a photograph that had been left out in the rain. The colors bled out, the edges softened into a blur of gray. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, water pooling around his worn sneakers, his shoulders slumped. I got him a towel and a dry sweatshirt, one of my old university ones that was ridiculously big on me, but fit him perfectly. He took them with a quiet murmur of thanks and disappeared into the bathroom. When he came back out, wrapped in my faded gray cotton, he looked younger, more vulnerable than I had ever seen him. He finally met my eyes, and the exhaustion in his gaze was a physical blow. "Chloe and I broke up," he said, and the words fell into the quiet room with no ceremony. They just lay there between us, stark and undeniable. I didn't know what to say. The conventional platitudes felt cheap and insulting. "I'm sorry" felt inadequate. "Are you okay?" was a stupid question. So I just nodded, gesturing to the worn leather armchair across from my editing desk. "Sit down," I said. "I'll make tea." He didn't want to talk about it, not really. He answered my gentle, probing questions with monosyllabic replies. It wasn't a dramatic, explosive end, he explained. It was a slow fizzle, a quiet erosion of feeling until they were left standing on two separate shores with an ocean of apathy between them. It was, he said, just over. The finality in his voice was what was so chilling. He wasn't heartbroken in the way you see in movies, full of dramatic tears and angry recriminations. He was hollowed out, scooped clean of emotion, leaving behind a profound and echoing emptiness. He spoke of it like a logistical problem, a system that had ceased to function efficiently. But I could see the tremor in his hands as he held the warm mug, the way he stared at a fixed point on the far wall, his focus miles away. He was lonely. It was a loneliness so profound it seemed to have its own gravitational pull, and it was drawing me in. That night was the beginning of the shift. He didn't go home. He fell asleep in that armchair around midnight, his head lolling to one side, the empty mug resting on the floor beside him. I watched him for a long time, the rise and fall of his chest, the faint furrow of his brow that remained even in sleep. I didn't want to wake him. It felt like a kindness to let him stay submerged in the temporary peace of unconsciousness. I gently took the mug, draped a soft woolen blanket over him, and went to my own bed, leaving the living room light on dim. It felt like standing watch. I lay awake for hours, listening to the sound of his soft, even breathing from the other room, a fragile anchor in the stormy silence of the night. He left before I woke up, but a text message was waiting for me. Thanks for last night. I owe you one. It was the first brick laid in the foundation of our new reality. He had sought refuge with me. He had chosen my quiet space as his harbor, and something unspoken had passed between us in that shared silence. The architecture of our friendship had sustained its first hairline fracture, and the comfortable, platonic lines we had always drawn were beginning to blur at the edges. I didn't know it then, but this was the start of the ritual, the beginning of a new, unspoken language that would come to define us. The ritual began, as most habits do, without intention. It started with movie nights. A few days after the breakup, Sam texted, suggesting we watch that terrible sci-fi franchise we both secretly loved. He showed up with takeout, his demeanor a carefully constructed imitation of his old self, but the brightness in his eyes was still dimmed, the wattage turned down. We ate on the floor, cross-legged like kids, and then migrated to the couch. The first time, he maintained a careful, deliberate distance, a cushion's width of empty space between us. It was a formal declaration of boundaries, a reminder that this was just two friends watching a movie. I respected it, mirroring his posture, keeping my hands to myself, my focus pinned to the screen. But as the movie progressed, and the city outside grew dark and quiet, the space began to shrink. It was a slow, geological shift, a continental drift measured in inches. A slight lean during a tense scene, his knee brushing against mine as he reached for the remote. By the end of the second film, his shoulder was pressed against mine, his head tilted slightly in my direction. The contact was electric, a low-grade current that hummed just beneath my skin. I focused on my breathing, keeping it slow and even, terrified that any sudden movement might shatter the fragile truce we had established. He fell asleep before the credits rolled, his head slumping onto my shoulder. It was a mirror of that first night in the armchair, but this was different. This was closer. This was a choice, even if it was an unconscious one. I sat there, motionless, for nearly an hour, my arm going numb, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I was afraid to move, afraid to breathe, afraid to break the spell. This became our new normal. 2, sometimes 3 nights a week, he would appear at my door, sometimes with food, sometimes with just his own tired presence. The pretense of watching movies remained, but we both knew it was just an excuse. He was seeking comfort, a bulwark against the loneliness that seemed to follow him like a shadow. My couch became his sanctuary, and with each visit, the physical distance between us eroded a little more. The cushion's width of empty space disappeared entirely. Soon, he would simply settle next to me, tucking his legs up, his side flush against mine from shoulder to knee, as if my body were a source of warmth he needed to survive the encroaching cold. My internal world became a relentless churn of analysis and interpretation. Every gesture, every touch, was a piece of evidence to be examined. When his hand rested on the cushion between us, was the slight brush of his pinky against mine accidental or intentional? When he shifted in his sleep and his arm fell across my stomach, was it just the random mechanics of a sleeping body, or was it a subconscious reach for connection? I was a detective in the country of his affection, searching for clues, for a map that would lead me out of the wilderness of ambiguity. I photographed him in my mind, freezing these moments, studying them from every angle. The way the faint scar above his eyebrow disappeared when he smiled, the precise shade of his skin under the warm lamplight, the sound of his sigh as he settled against me, a sound of such profound release it felt like a confession. I was living a double life. Outwardly, I was the calm, steady friend, the solid ground he could rely on. I was patient, I was quiet, I was safe. But inwardly, I was a maelstrom of hope and fear. Hope that this meant what I desperately wanted it to mean. Fear that I was projecting my own desires onto his simple need for platonic comfort. I was terrified of misreading the signs, of making a move that would shatter everything. The thought of making it awkward, of seeing that guarded look in his eyes, of him pulling away and re-erecting the walls between us, was a physical pain. So I did nothing. I became a master of stillness, a statue of a friend, letting him dictate the terms of our proximity, letting him lead this strange, silent dance. The guest room was another piece of the puzzle. The first few times he stayed over, he'd wake up on the couch, groaning about a crick in his neck, and stumble home in the early morning light. Then one night, I suggested he just take the guest room. It's just sitting there, I'd said, trying to make it sound casual, a practical solution to a practical problem. He agreed with a grateful murmur. From then on, our evenings would end with him saying a soft, "Good night, Leo," and disappearing down the short hallway to the spare bedroom. But a new element was introduced into our ritual. He started leaving the door ajar, not wide open, but cracked just enough for a sliver of hallway light to cut across his floor, just enough for the sound of his breathing to travel down the hall to my own room. That open door became a symbol, a question hanging in the silent air of my apartment. Why? Was it a simple oversight? A fear of the dark he'd never mentioned? Or was it something else? An invitation? My mind would race as I lay in my own bed, staring at the ceiling. I could imagine the space on the other side of his mattress, the empty half of the bed. It felt like a dare, a challenge to my own carefully constructed inaction. I never took it. I would lie there, listening, until the sound of his steady breathing lulled me into a restless sleep filled with dreams of hallways and doors I could never quite bring myself to open. The intimacy of the ritual deepened by slow, almost imperceptible degrees. One night, a particularly cold one, he shivered beside me on the couch. Without thinking, I pulled the large quilt from the back of the sofa and draped it over both of us. He murmured his thanks and burrowed into the warmth, shifting even closer, tucking his cold feet near mine. Under the cover of the quilt, in the manufactured darkness it created, the rules felt different. His hand, which had been resting on his own leg, moved, settling on my knee. It was a light, casual touch, but it felt like a brand. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I just let it rest there, a warm, heavy anchor of possibility. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure he could feel the vibration through the couch cushions. He didn't move his hand away, not for the rest of the night. Another evening, he was more tired than usual, stressed from a looming deadline at work. He barely spoke, just collapsed against me, his body a dead weight of exhaustion. He turned, pressing his face into my shoulder, his arm wrapping around my waist, and he was asleep within minutes. I was trapped, pinned by the weight of his trust and my own burgeoning, overwhelming love. I could feel the soft tickle of his eyelashes against my neck when he shifted, the warmth of his breath a ghost on my skin. I brought my own hand up, my fingers hovering for a long moment over his hair before I finally gave in, letting them sink into the soft, dark strands. It was the first time I had initiated contact, the first time I had allowed myself to respond to the silent question his body was asking. He sighed in his sleep, a deep, contented sound, and snuggled closer. I felt a crack in the dam I had built around my heart. A small, terrifying, beautiful fissure. These nights became the rhythm of my life. The quiet anticipation of his arrival, the slow, careful dance of our evenings, the charged stillness after he fell asleep, and the lonely, hollow silence of my apartment after he left in the morning. I was living on a knife's edge of feeling, balanced precariously between the comfort of our closeness and the agony of its ambiguity. I felt like I was developing a photograph in slow motion, waiting for the final image to become clear, terrified that it would be overexposed, ruined by a single clumsy movement, a single miscalculation of the light. He never spoke of it. He never acknowledged the way he slept curled against me, the way his hand would find mine under the blanket, the way he would sometimes murmur my name in his sleep. In the morning, it was as if a reset button had been pushed. He would be back to being Sam, my friend, making jokes as he poured cereal in my kitchen, talking about his work, about sports, about anything and everything except the geography of our bodies on the couch the night before. And he would always end his departure with some variation of the same theme, a quick, "Thanks for letting me crash, man. Hope it's not getting weird." It's not weird. I would lie, my voice a marvel of calm I did not feel. It's fine. And he would nod, satisfied, and the shield would be back in place. And I would be left alone with the ghost of his warmth and the deafening roar of everything I couldn't say. I was drowning in the unspoken, and I was starting to fear that I didn't know how to swim. The night the ritual broke was no different from any other, at first. It was a Friday. A long week had bled into a cool, clear evening. Sam arrived looking frayed at the edges. The weight of his work week settled deep in the lines around his eyes. He brought pizza this time, and we ate it straight from the box, the easy silence between us comfortable and familiar. We settled on the couch, falling into our usual configuration as if drawn by magnets. His side pressed against mine, his head resting on my shoulder, the quilt pulled over our laps. We put on a movie, some quiet, atmospheric drama I'd been wanting to see. But this time, something was different. The air itself felt different, thick with a new kind of tension. It wasn't anxious or uncomfortable. It was anticipatory, like the deep, heavy stillness in the air right before a thunderstorm breaks. He wasn't sleeping. I knew it. His breathing wasn't the slow, deep rhythm of slumber. It was lighter, more conscious. And he was too still. A sleeping body has a certain kind of surrender, a complete release of tension. Sam was holding himself with a quiet, deliberate control. The movie played on, the dialogue a meaningless murmur in the background. My entire universe had contracted to the space we occupied on that couch, to the points of contact between our bodies. The warmth of his cheek against my shoulder, the weight of his leg against mine, the subtle pressure of his hand resting on the cushion, inches from my own. My mind, usually a hive of frantic analysis, had gone completely silent. It was as if every part of me was holding its breath, waiting. Half an hour passed. An hour. The movie's credits began to roll, scrolling up the screen in silent white letters, the melancholy score filling the room. Neither of us moved. The silence that followed was profound. It wasn't empty. It was full. It was packed with every unspoken word, every hesitant touch, every shared glance from the past several months. It was the loudest silence I had ever heard. I could feel my own heartbeat, a slow, heavy thud that seemed to shake my entire frame. I was certain he could feel it too. He shifted then, a small movement. He lifted his head from my shoulder, and I felt the loss of his warmth as a sudden, sharp chill. I kept my eyes fixed on the blank television screen, my profile to him. I couldn't bring myself to look at him. I was afraid of what I would see, or what I wouldn't see, in his eyes. He didn't move away. He just sat there, beside me, the space between us now humming with a strange energy. I could feel his gaze on the side of my face. "Leo," he said. His voice was quiet, rough around the edges, a sound I had never heard from him before. It was the sound of a question. It was the sound of a threshold. I finally turned my head to look at him. The room was dark, lit only by the faint glow of a street lamp filtering through the window, but I could see his face clearly. His expression was one I couldn't quite decipher. It was vulnerable, uncertain, and incredibly serious. The easygoing mask of Sam, my friend, was gone. In its place was someone I felt I was seeing for the very first time. His eyes were locked on mine, and there was an intensity in them that made it hard to breathe. He was looking at me, really looking at me, and in his gaze I saw a mirror of my own terrifying, hopeful yearning. He didn't say anything else for a long moment. He just held my gaze, and the world seemed to slow down, the seconds stretching into infinities. The air crackled. This was it. This was the moment the photograph finally developed, the image resolving into shocking clarity. He was not just seeking comfort. He was not just my friend. This was something else. He lifted his hand, the one that had been resting on the cushion between us, and slowly, tentatively, brought it to my face. His fingers were warm against my cheek, his thumb stroking gently along my jawline. The touch was feather-light, but it sent a shockwave through my entire system. It was a question, a plea, a statement, all at once. I didn't pull away. I leaned into his touch, just slightly, closing my eyes for a brief second. It was my answer. When I opened them again, he had moved closer. Our knees were touching, our faces only inches apart. I could feel the warmth of his breath on my lips. "Would it be okay?" he whispered, and his voice was so low it was almost lost in the quiet of the room. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I knew what he was asking. He was asking for permission to cross the line, to shatter the beautiful, fragile thing our friendship had been and see what, if anything, could be built from the pieces. He was giving me an out, a chance to say no, a chance to retreat to the safety of the way things were. He was giving me the choice. I didn't trust my voice. I was afraid if I tried to speak, nothing would come out but the sound of my own heart breaking with the sheer force of my love for him. So I just nodded. A single, small, decisive movement. Yes. He closed the remaining distance between us. His lips met mine with a hesitant, searching pressure. It wasn't a passionate, movie-style kiss. It was something far more profound. It was quiet, and it was gentle, and it was full of 1,000 unasked questions. It was a confession. It tasted of salt and uncertainty, and a hope so fierce it felt like a prayer. I brought my hand up to his neck, my fingers tangling in the soft hair at his nape, and kissed him back. I poured every unspoken word, every secret glance, every moment of silent, agonizing affection from the past 5 years into that single, gentle press of our mouths. It was a conversation we had been waiting our whole lives to have. When we finally pulled apart, we just rested our foreheads together, breathing the same air, our eyes closed. The silence that returned was different. It was calm. It was settled. The storm had broken, and this was the quiet peace of the aftermath. The line had been crossed. The door had been opened. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that nothing would ever be the same again. The morning light was a soft, apologetic gray, filtering through the blinds and striping the floor of my bedroom. I woke up slowly, a deep sense of peace settled in my bones. For a moment, I didn't know why. Then the memory of the night before rushed back in. The quiet, the question, the kiss. A slow smile spread across my face. I turned my head on the pillow, expecting to see him there, expecting to meet his eyes in the morning light and begin the first day of whatever this new world was. The other side of the bed was empty. The sheets were cool to the touch, a hollow space where he should have been. A knot of ice formed in my stomach. I sat up, listening. The apartment was silent. Too silent. Not the comfortable, lived-in silence of two people sharing a space, but the stark, empty silence of being alone. I got out of bed, pulling on a t-shirt, and walked into the living room. The pizza box was still on the coffee table. The quilt was folded neatly on the back of the couch. His shoes were gone from the entryway. He was gone. I picked up my phone from the kitchen counter, my hand trembling slightly. There was one new message. It was from him. My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened it. The words on the screen felt like a punch to the gut. Hey, I'm so sorry about last night. I crossed a line. I don't want to make things awkward between us. There it was. That phrase. The shield, the deflection, the escape hatch. But this time it wasn't a nervous joke offered on a couch. It was a cold, digital dismissal delivered in the harsh light of day. It was a denial of everything that had passed between us. The intimacy, the vulnerability, the earth-shattering tenderness of that kiss. All of it reduced to a line he had crossed, an error in judgment to be apologized for and swept under the rug. Awkward. He had taken the most honest, beautiful moment of my life and labeled it awkward. A wave of something cold and sharp, like grief, washed over me. I felt like a fool, a naive, hopeful idiot who had completely and utterly misread everything. I had mistaken his loneliness for affection, his need for comfort for a desire for me. The photograph I thought had finally come into focus was now just a blur, a meaningless mess of gray. I didn't reply to his text. What could I possibly say? It wasn't awkward for me. It was the moment I've been waiting 5 years for. To do so would be to expose the full, terrifying depth of my feelings, to hand him the weapon of my own vulnerability. He had already retreated behind his walls, and I would be damned if I was going to stand outside them, begging to be let in. So I said nothing. I deleted the message, as if erasing the words could erase the wound they had left. The days that followed were some of the longest of my life. The silence from him was a physical presence in my apartment. Every corner of the space screamed his absence. The couch felt vast and empty. The guest room door, now firmly shut, was a monument to what I had lost. He didn't call. He didn't text again. It was as if he had vanished not only from my apartment, but from the face of the earth. Our friendship, once the most solid and dependable structure in my life, had been revealed to be a house of cards, and he had blown it down with a single, careless breath. The anger came first, a hot, protective shell around the fragile core of my hurt. How could he? How could he initiate something so profound, look at me with such raw honesty in his eyes, and then simply pretend it never happened? How could he reduce it to a mistake? It was cowardly. It was cruel. I spent 2 days fueled by that anger, pacing my apartment, editing photos with a vicious precision, trying to channel the storm inside me into something productive. But the anger couldn't last. It was exhausting, and underneath it, the hurt was still there, a deep, persistent ache. It was followed by a wave of self-doubt. Maybe I had imagined it all. Maybe the vulnerability in his eyes was a projection of my own. Maybe the kiss had meant nothing to him, a fleeting impulse born of loneliness and stress that he regretted the moment it was over. The thought was humiliating. I felt stripped bare, my most private, precious feelings exposed and discarded as an inconvenience, an awkward situation to be managed and forgotten. By the fifth day of silence, the ache had settled into a dull, resigned sadness. I missed my friend. Beyond the romantic yearning, beyond the sting of rejection, I missed the easy rhythm of our friendship. I missed his stupid jokes, his loud laugh, the comfortable way he filled the empty spaces in my quiet life. The thought that I had lost that, forever, was more painful than the rejection itself. And that was when I knew I couldn't let it end like this. I couldn't let our 5 years of history be erased by a ghost of a text message. I didn't know if we could ever go back to what we were, and I certainly didn't know if we could go forward, but I knew I couldn't live in this silent, agonizing limbo. He owed me more than a text message. We owed each other more than that. I needed to hear it from his own mouth. I needed to look him in the eye and understand what had happened. I found my keys, my resolve hardening into something solid and real. I was done waiting. I was done analyzing. I was done being the quiet observer. For the first time, I was going to be the one to initiate. I drove to his apartment, my hands clenched on the steering wheel, my heart a nervous, unsteady beat in my chest. I didn't know what I was going to say. I just knew that the silence had to end. His apartment was in a newer building across town, a place that always felt a little sterile and impersonal compared to my own worn-in space. I stood outside his door for a full minute, my courage wavering. What if he didn't answer? What if he told me to leave? I took a deep breath, the air feeling thin and sharp in my lungs, and knocked. The sound echoed in the quiet hallway. I waited. I heard a faint shuffling from inside, and then the sound of the deadbolt sliding back. The door opened a few inches, and he was there, standing in the gap. He looked terrible. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his hair was a mess. He was wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and sweatpants, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. The sight of him, so frayed and exhausted, extinguished the last embers of my anger, leaving only a deep, profound concern. "Leo," he said, his voice thick with surprise. He didn't seem angry, just lost. "Can I come in?" I asked, my own voice steadier than I expected. He hesitated for a second, his eyes darting away from mine, and then he sighed, a sound of pure defeat, and opened the door wider. I stepped inside. His apartment was a mess. Clothes were draped over chairs. Takeout containers were stacked on the counter. It was the physical manifestation of the chaos he was clearly feeling inside. He didn't meet my eyes. He just walked over to the window and stood there, his back to me, staring out at the city lights. "I came here," I started, my voice quiet but firm, "because you don't get to do that. You don't get to kiss me like that, and then send me a text message. You don't get to make it my problem to solve." He flinched at the word kiss, a barely perceptible tightening of his shoulders. He still didn't turn around. "I told you," he said, his voice muffled. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. I don't want to make things weird." "Stop saying that," I said, and this time my voice was sharp, cutting through the heavy air between us. "Stop using that word. It's already weird, Sam. You made it weird when you started sleeping on my couch every night. You made it weird when you started holding my hand in your sleep. You made it weird when you left your door open. And you damn well made it weird when you kissed me. So please, for the love of God, stop pretending this is about not wanting to make things awkward. What is it really about?" He was silent for a long time. I could see the tension in his posture, the rigid line of his spine. I thought for a moment he wasn't going to answer, that he was just going to shut down completely. But then, he finally turned around. His face was a mask of conflict, his eyes shining with unshed tears. When he spoke, his voice was raw, broken. "It's about the fact that I'm terrified," he whispered. "Okay, I'm terrified. I came to you because I was lonely after Chloe. I came to you because you're safe. You're the calmest, most solid person I know. And I just wanted to be near that. I didn't expect it to turn into anything else." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure distress. "But it did. Every night, sitting there with you, it stopped being about missing her and it started being about needing to be there with you. And I didn't understand it. I still don't. And that night, when I kissed you, it was the only thing in the world that made sense. It felt right. More right than anything has felt in a very long time. He finally looked at me, his gaze direct and pleading. And that's what scares me, Leo. I don't know what this is. I don't know what it means about me. My whole life has been a straight line. And you feel like this sudden, sharp turn, and I don't know where the road goes. So I panicked. I woke up the next morning, and all I could feel was fear. Fear of what my family would say, what my friends would think, what it would mean. And I ran. I ran because I'm a coward, and I hurt you because I was scared. And I am so sorry. The confession hung in the air between us, raw and honest and painful. All the anger, all the hurt I had been carrying for days, simply dissolved. In its place was a vast, aching empathy. He wasn't rejecting me. He was struggling with himself. He wasn't running from me. He was running from a feeling that was bigger than anything he'd ever known, a feeling that threatened to rewrite the entire story he had told himself about his life. The unknowing initiator had finally been forced to know, and the knowledge was shaking him to his core. I closed the distance between us, stopping a few feet in front of him. I didn't touch him. I just stood there and let him see the truth in my own eyes. You don't have to have it all figured out, Sam, I said, my voice soft. I don't have a roadmap either. All I know is how I feel. And all I know is that what happened between us wasn't awkward. And it wasn't a mistake. I held his gaze. But it's okay to be scared. What's not okay is disappearing. Don't ever do that to me again. A single tear finally escaped and traced a path down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. He just nodded, a jerky, desperate movement. Okay, he whispered. Okay, the word was a promise. It was a beginning. It was the first honest step onto a new, unknown road that we would have to navigate together. After his confession, the tension in the room didn't vanish, but it transformed. It was no longer the sharp, brittle tension of conflict and misunderstanding, but the soft, pliable tension of two people trying to find their footing on new ground. We stood there in the messy landscape of his apartment, the wreckage of his fear and my hurt surrounding us. And for the first time since that kiss, we started to build something new. We talked. For hours. We didn't solve everything, not by a long shot. But we laid the foundations. He spoke of the confusion, the quiet sense of otherness he'd felt his whole life without ever having a name for it. He talked about the easy, uncomplicated box he had put himself in. The good son, the reliable friend, the straight guy, and the terror of realizing that the box was too small, that it had been constricting him for years without him even noticing. Being with me, he said, feeling what he felt for me, wasn't just about a person, it was a fundamental challenge to his own identity, and he hadn't been equipped to handle it. His relationship with Chloe, he realized now, hadn't been a lie, but it had been comfortable, safe. It had been the socially accepted path, the one that required no difficult questions. I was the difficult question. And I, in turn, told him about my own years of silence. I told him about the darkroom in my heart where I had kept my feelings for him hidden away, convinced they could never survive in the light. I told him how I had treasured our friendship so fiercely that I was willing to sacrifice my own happiness to preserve it. I confessed that his sudden reliance on me had been both a dream come true and a waking nightmare, a constant, agonizing dance on the edge of a hope I was too afraid to embrace. We laid all our cards on the table, all our fears and vulnerabilities, until the space between us was no longer filled with ambiguity, but with a fragile, shimmering honesty. There was no grand, cinematic declaration of love. There was no promise of forever. It was quieter than that, more real. It was an agreement to be patient, an agreement to be honest, an agreement to stop running. When I finally left his apartment late that night, he walked me to the door. The air was charged again, but this time with a shy, hopeful energy. He hesitated, his hand on the doorknob, and then he leaned in and kissed me again. This kiss was different from the first. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. It was soft, and it was sure, and it tasted like a promise. Don't be a stranger, he said, with the first genuine, unforced smile I had seen on his face in a week. I won't, I promised back. The days that followed were a process of gentle rediscovery. It was like learning a new language together, a language of intentional touch and open conversation. He started staying over at my place again, but the pretense was gone. There were no more obligatory movies we didn't watch. There was no more sleeping on the couch. The guest room door remained firmly closed because he didn't sleep there anymore. He slept in my bed, next to me. The first night was tentative, two bodies navigating a new and unfamiliar geography, afraid of taking up too much space. But by the third night, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. I would wake in the middle of the night to find him curled against my back, his arms slung around my waist, his breathing a slow, steady rhythm against my neck. It was the very thing I had once only dreamed of, the closeness I had analyzed from a distance, and now it was real. It was my life. We built our new normal in the small, quiet moments of domesticity, making coffee together in the morning, bumping hips in my small kitchen. My camera, which had so often been a barrier between me and the world, a way to observe without participating, was now a tool for documenting our joy. I took pictures of him, not as a secret observer, but openly. A shot of him laughing, head thrown back, as he tried to cook pancakes and filled the kitchen with smoke. A quiet portrait of him asleep in my bed, the morning light tracing the curve of his shoulder. He never shied away from the lens. He let me see him, truly see him, and I captured it all, every frame a testament to this beautiful, unexpected thing we were building. The couch, once the stage for our ambiguous ritual, became just a couch again. We still sat there, of course, but the dynamic had shifted completely. Now, his head would rest in my lap as I read, my fingers idly tracing patterns in his hair. Or we would sit tangled together, his arms around me, my head on his chest, listening to the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. The anxiety was gone, replaced by a profound and peaceful certainty. The silence was no longer heavy with unspoken meaning. It was light, comfortable, a shared space of rest. He no longer needed a shield. He no longer needed to worry about making things awkward. We had journeyed through the heart of awkwardness and come out the other side, into a landscape of quiet, unassuming grace. We learned that a home is not always a place with four walls and a roof. Sometimes, it is the safe harbor of another person's presence. It is the feeling of being completely, utterly known and accepted not in spite of your flaws and fears, but because of them. It is the quiet understanding that passes in a single glance across a room. He had come to my apartment seeking a refuge from his loneliness, and in the process, we had ended up building a home together, one honest conversation, one gentle touch, one shared morning at a time. The landscape had changed forever on that ordinary Tuesday night, but what I hadn't known then was that we were not just crossing a threshold into a new room. We were stepping onto the foundation of a new life, a life where the doors were never left ambiguously ajar, but were thrown wide open, inviting us both to finally come inside. We began to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we'd learned to create together.